Hello and welcome. We're going to give it a couple more seconds here as we are preparing to start our roundtable today for everyone to join us with audio and video. Welcome, everyone. Looks like everyone from the waiting room has joined us, and more people will be able to log in throughout our roundtable today. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this National Safety Council Division's roundtable discussion presented by the Women's Division. Today's topic is Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. Today, we are discussing how data bias affects our workplace and the designs of things we come into contact with. We will discuss topics from sections 2 and 3 of the book, Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Caroline Criado Perez. I'm Jessica Pack, Member Engagement Associate for the National Safety Council. Member Appreciation Month is here, and we're taking all of January to thank those members of the National Safety Council and partners in safety. Take advantage of all of the free resources to keep your employees safe this month and all year long. Those resources include a digital safety observances calendar, digital social media kit, member exclusive webinars, free shipping at the NSA swag store. And we also ask that you please take time this month to complete the membership survey that will help us better serve you in the year ahead and beyond. All of this is available at a link that I will drop into the chat. We also have a full NSC calendar for 2023 of in-person opportunities to network and connect, as well as webinars, roundtables, and other resources. I will be sending out a follow-up email after this to everyone who's registered with links to that calendar. I have a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. The format of our roundtable today will include a recorded presentation with a slide deck on our topic of data bias. The recording will be emailed to all registrants following the event with a PDF of the slide deck that's going to be shared. Following the conclusion of the planned remarks, I will stop the recording. For the remainder of our time, I invite everyone to come off mute and join the discussion. This is a safe time and space for you to speak freely, share ideas, successes, struggles, ask questions. The time is going to be yours at that point until the top of the hour. We ask as you come off mute if you're able, to identify yourself by name. And if you're not, that's fine. If you are in a space where you cannot come off mute or speak, please feel free to use the chat and one of us will share your message with the group. It's my pleasure today to introduce our presenter and facilitator. Catherine McCullough is president of VERITY Now. Catherine has spent over 30 years in Washington advocating for innovation and safety in the automotive, telecommunications, and technology sectors, both in the government, serving as a counsel for the U.S. Senate Commerce Committee, and in the private sector, working with clients from Fortune 500 companies to successful startups. Catherine, I'm going to turn the time over to you. And once again, just as a reminder, this part of our roundtable is recorded, everyone, and I will let you know when that recording stops.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so glad that you could all be here to talk about one of my favorite books, Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Caroline Criado Perez. I'm the president of VERITY Now. I've been around Washington for quite a while, as Jessica told you. And I feel very fortunate to be able to be president of this organization that we founded about 2 years ago because we were concerned about the issue of crash testing when it comes to women. It's one of the issues that's covered in Invisible Women, along with many others. But it's one that we're taking particular notice of because in the US crash test system, automotive vehicles are tested for males much more than females, and that results and a lot of inequity in terms of safety. In fact, women are 73% more likely than men to be seriously injured in a vehicle crash. And then depending on which report you read, they're somewhere between 9 and 28% more likely to die. We have had some successes over the last 2 years that we're very proud of. We have been chaired, first of all, by the wonderful public policy powerhouses of Susan Molinari and Beth Brooke. Susan, we are lucky enough to, she's actually joined this phone call, and I don't know if any of you have dealt with Susan before, if you've talked with her. If you haven't, I kind of feel sorry for you, because she's such a delightful person, in addition to being such a righteous dame in the policy space. Obviously, she was a congresswoman. You probably all heard of her from, her tenure in the House. But also she was head of public policy for Google. She has enormous credentials when it comes to standing up for women in policy areas, for instance, related to medical testing. And then, of course, she's just been wonderful in Verity Now. Beth Brooke has an equally, wonderful resume. I encourage you, if you ever get a chance to talk with these, groundbreaking ladies, definitely take your time. So after we kind of established our foundational win of attracting these terrific co-chairs, since then, we've been very fortunate to attract other support. In the House of Representatives, for instance, we've had a letter signed by 61 members of the House. We've also had 3 U.S. senators who have written to the Department of Transportation to advance our mission of gender equity in crash testing. We've had a letter full of industry leaders, safety leaders, again, political leaders who are all gathering around this issue and lending support, trying to raise awareness and trying to fix our testing system, and also include advanced testing equipment that can account truly for women's bodies in the crash testing regime. We are the leading voice in advocating for equity and safety testing for vehicles to protect women across the country. And our regulatory advocacy is building support across party lines. We're very proud that we're bipartisan, and we're very proud that we've gotten support from so many wonderful folks, including, by the way, National Safety Council have been just wonderful partners with us, kind of pushing our message forward, making sure that, we have great partnerships. Jessica, thank you so much for setting up this webinar. It's yet another opportunity for folks who care about, ridding their institutions of bias and making it not only more fair for everyone, but also more safe, and making the institutions that they work for, therefore, more productive. I think that, we all know probably from our own daily lives, and it's certainly confirmed with data, for instance, from Harvard Business Review, that when women are included in leadership, when women are included in business, when women are included on an equal basis, really in any institutional endeavor, that institution improves, whether it's by some measure of profitability, whether it's by other measures of productivity. We know that when we rid our institutions of bias, we all become better. And so that's really what today's discussion is all about. So I'm going to talk about the book, part 2 and part 3, and I'm going to kind of go through what the book covers, which is quite a lot, actually. There are so many fantastic statistics in here, so much data, and for an evidence-based nerd like me, it's so nice to see it all laid out in such a rational and well documented argument. But as I'm kind of talking this through, please don't let me inhibit any kind of discussion. We certainly have, discussion planned for later on. We have, kind of a more freewheeling discussion planned for when the camera is off, and when, folks can kind of all roundtable together. But I really welcome questions. I welcome discussion. I welcome somebody, raising their hand, or, just kind of even just coming off mute and saying, hey, what about this? What about that? Or this happened to me. I think I really value the kind of lateral communication and that kind of discussion that we have set up here. So again, thanks for that, Jessica. And so before I kind of set into Invisible Women, I sent a note to Susan when I found out that she registered that I was going to kind of put her on the spot a little bit. And Susan, I have some questions lined up for you later in this discussion, but I was wondering, did you want a chance to say anything before we kind of got started?
Well, you don't trust asking me questions on this topic while we're recording. Is that it, Catherine?
Well, Susan, no.
I get a little passionate about these things. Look, I just want to say thank you to the council and Catherine for always finding time to help us tell this story. I was in Congress in the 1990s when there really wasn't a lot of female members of Congress, and it was a big deal when we, started to grow from 2 to a few others in the United States Senate. And so it pains me at a time when in so many areas we are making strides that we still need to have this conversation, not only on car safety, but in so many other areas of our life. And so, this isn't, again, as Catherine said, more capably than I could. This is about safety. It's safety for ourselves, safety for our daughters, a conversation we should not have to be having in this day and age, but it transcends car safety. It still shows the power and structure, the power structure in this country, whether it's in corporations or in government. And so we just need to keep calling attention to it, and we can't get tired. So I just want to thank all of you for being with us today, and happy to answer questions at the end. And Catherine, thank you again for being the warrior that you are.
Oh, thank you, Susan. Inspiration, like that, that comes from you. I mean, that's what keeps us all moving forward. And thank you for fighting the fight for so long. And thank you for making real differences. And hopefully we'll have a little time to talk about some of your successes, later on. But, it's an interesting thing, I think, in safety, and I'd be interested to hear about other safety professionals talk about this. But, it's like you're tackling a problem that people don't know necessarily they're going to be affected by. And when you are successful, they don't know that they've been saved. They don't know, we don't know about the injuries that we don't suffer. We don't know about the fatalities that we miss. We can kind of prove it statistically, but you as a person don't know when, you didn't get hit by the drunk driver because of the good policy. And so I consider folks who work on safety, there's a real heroic aspect to it, because you are constantly pushing your institutions to move toward a place that has a good outcome for everyone, but is not always as tangible as we would love for it to be. So I think keeping up the flow of the discussion and the inspiration, and having leaders like Susan, kind of just being in there for year after year after year, it really makes a big difference. So that's kind of my opening. Again, I do hope that we'll get some different folks chatting, and I'm kind of I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat, and I'm going to rely on Jessica and Zoe and John, who work with Verity Now, and who basically I just do anything they tell me to do. But if they have anything that they see on the chat that they want me to address, then we can take it on there. So here we go. Invisible Women, Part 2. If any of you have had a chance to look at the book, you'll see that Part 2, the workplace, really kind of begins to sink its teeth into the economic discussion, and also the part of the workplace that doesn't get seen, which can be either the home or the kind of the stress of the workplace, that the extra work that women do in the home and outside of the workplace, takes on women, that toll that it takes on women. And the way that Caroline describes it is she talks about unencumbered workers and how men are kind of in this category of being unencumbered necessarily, rather than women who tend to take on more of the household work and, the child care, the elder care, the house care, which is not compensated, not seen, and that kind of difference of being an unencumbered versus an encumbered worker, in addition to biases that are in the workplace that are kind of built around males as the default worker, meaning, the kind of workplace policies are built around the idea of an unencumbered worker, really serve to put women at a disadvantage. So there are some really terrific statistics in the book, but I have to give Caroline real props for starting her chapter with talking about Ryan Gosling, because, why shouldn't Ryan Gosling, be in really every book, in my opinion. But one of the things she writes is that when Ryan Gosling, the actor, thanked his partner, Eva Mendes, in the 2017 Golden Globes for her unpaid work, acknowledging that without it, he would not be on stage accepting the award, he marked himself out as a rare man. And I think that was, I actually remember watching that moment. I actually remember thinking, it was so, I was so pleased to see it happen. And I was so hopeful that it was indicative of maybe larger conversations that might be happening, where, you have maybe male allies really explaining things that are unseen while they have a platform. And I was hoping that it would kind of spread itself, to the rest of the workplace. And I was always very impressed with that. Caroline kind of continues the chapter by going on and describing all the unpaid work versus paid work that gets accounted for in things like government pension schemes, in the US, of course, Social Security, about how it kind of can result in, for instance, pay gaps when women start a career and then take on care responsibilities once they've had children, for instance, and then it reduces the amount of pay that they get, and it creates, again, of course, a lessened contribution to their Social Security or other kind of pension scheme, and then they end up having essentially a lower payout for their retirement, all because they are female and because they have this kind of childbearing function, or they have taken on these care responsibilities because that's how kind of the social contract kind of biases toward. And I think for anybody who has been a parent, if you haven't kind of read this chapter and kind of gone through the discussion of kind of the near term and longer term effects of what happens when people have children in a workplace, especially in a workplace maybe that's even a competitive workplace or a workplace with a lot of hours. I urge you to take a moment and read that book. Susan, you're shaking your head. Yes, I know that you have a good experience in this area, a good amount of experience. Did you want to comment on that at all?
I guess it to what I said before, Catherine, it just amazes me, and I'm reading one of the questions in the chat, about the fact that it seems like we are having the same conversations over and over again when it comes to, just like say now, women in the workplace and the issues that we have faced when it comes to, and when I was in Congress, family leave, never mind paid family leave, was such a big deal and extremely controversial, and now we're still having this discussion in terms of paid family leave when it's been resolved in pretty much the rest of the world, or at least in industrialized society. I was laughing about when the legislature said that now that women have to wear jackets. Now that was that in Mississippi, Michigan. I see the MI. I can't remember where it
Michigan.
was. Michigan with Gretchen Whitmer. You're telling women what to wear. It's just a point of personal privilege. When I was in Congress, I had given a 1-minute speech on the floor. And when I came back, I had, the Kathy and Regis show at the time, the New York Times. Everybody wanted to talk to me, having absolutely nothing to do with what I was speaking about, which was national defense, but the fact that I was the first female to wear pants on the floor of the House of Representatives. Because at that time, I didn't know it was not allowed, and it was, because there was no dress code for women, because the people who wrote the dress code never thought that there would be women in the legislature. But I think it's funny, but it's so sad that we now face the issues that we're facing, and our legislatures are taking up things like, should women's shoulders be covered? It does seem like, the 1 step forward, 2 steps back, but that's not a good enough reason for us not to attend and talk about, what we're doing here. Catherine, if I can just, and I won't cite who,
Please.
when we were having this conversation with a safety official in government who was a female, and we were talking about this issue, and this person said, well, it's true that men cause most of the really serious and severe accidents. So, yes, we should, and so we're saying, like, let's make women safer. And the answer was, so we really want to educate the men to be better drivers, which is fine. But once again, the answer was, let's put all our resources towards the men on the road, as opposed to taking some of those resources to make women safer while the men in the road sort of grow up. And I looked at Catherine after that and just thought, boy, we had those moments when we thought we were really making a difference, and then sometimes it just really, sneaks up underground. Oh. Thank you for letting me get that off my chest.
No, that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. You have so much, great experience, and such a unique experience in some ways, and such, unfortunately, a common experience in other ways. That I think it's really vulnerable and really important for us to all talk about these issues and discuss them fully. Again, this is a safe place to do all of that, and so I think it's really a valuable way to have the discussion move forward. I'm going to quickly kind of push through the next few bullets, and because I think that she covers so much that's so interesting in part 2. So for instance, the next chapter, which talks about the myth of meritocracy, I have to say I found fascinating, because I feel like, we have, and certainly I was raised with this idea that, in the US, we, one of our main differentiators is that we are very merit-based. Obviously, we started as a colony in a reaction to kind of a more class-based system, and kind of the idea around, if you get a certain type of training, if you get a certain type of education, if you go into the workplace and you work hard and you communicate well and do 1, 2, 3, and 4, you will be recognized, and because your merit benefits everyone. And I think that I'm perhaps not the only person on this call to have maybe found every once in a while that I feel like I'm at a conference table full of guys, and I just said something, and when I said it, it was ignored, and when some other guy said it, 30 seconds later, exactly the same thing somehow becomes the best idea in the room. And, those kinds of demonstrations of kind of non-meritocracy that kind of permeate many workplaces. I definitely don't want to say all, obviously some cultures are wonderful. Some, I've worked with a lot of wonderful, wonderful men. But certainly if it's still happening once, it's still happening too many times. And so I thought that Caroline's chapter on the myth of meritocracy was really interesting. And I'd like to read a little bit of page 93, because I thought that it was pretty interesting. She said, despite evidence suggesting that, if anything, the US is less meritocratic than other industrialized countries, Americans in particular hold on to meritocracy as an article of faith, and employment and promotion strategies over the past few decades have increasingly been designed as if meritocracy is a reality. A survey of US firms found that 95% used performance evaluations in 2002, and 90% had merit-based pay plan in place. The problem is there's little evidence that these approaches actually work. In fact, there's strong evidence that they don't. An analysis of 248 performance reviews collected from a variety of US-based tech companies found that women receive negative personality criticism that men simply don't. Women are told to watch their tone, to step back. They are called bossy, abrasive, strident, aggressive, emotional, and irrational. Out of all of these words, only aggressive appeared in men's reviews at all, and, quote, twice with an exhortation to be more of it. I found that just really interesting. I mean, when empirical evaluation of what is supposed to be a meritocratic evaluation is performed, biases are clearly found, and I've seen tons of other evidence along these lines, and yet we still perform performance evaluations in this way. We still hold on to this ideal of things being meritocratic. And I think, even though, again, I still really do believe in meritocracy, I do believe that's the way that it should be. And I think a lot of other people do. I think that what Caroline is saying is that even though that is the way things should be, our kind of default to malehood and males being the default human, including the default human in the workplace, and that's kind of the best way to be, the most meritorious way to be, the only way to be, means that if anyone is not a male or not performing in a male-like fashion, then they're going to be judged in a negative sense. And so yeah, I think if anybody has anything that they want to discuss on that, I'd certainly be interested to discuss it now, or that's something that we can kind of bring up later in the later kind of off-camera discussion. But if you haven't had a chance to read the book, I would definitely take a moment to kind of go through that part of the book. Moving on a little bit, and I'm going to try to zip through this a little bit more because I see that we're lagging a little bit behind, which is really not surprising considering that there's so much interesting stuff that she's packed into the book. I think the outcome of having this kind of merit-based, male-based workplace is that white men, for instance, are more likely to be promoted, they're better compensated, they stay longer in positions, and they get more published, for instance, in academia. They also get cited more often in academia. And when you are cited in academia, it means that you're more likely to stay in academia and to get promoted in academia. And Caroline has a very nice discussion of kind of that circular bias that may be affecting the academic world. I would also, she wrote this book before COVID, but I would point out that if anybody's interested in how the new vaccines became a thing, you might want to kind of look into how the new form of vaccine that we use for COVID and that was able to be developed so quickly, that the science underlying that that vaccine really foundered for years with a female researcher who was not able to get any traction for her new way of approaching vaccines. She wasn't able to get funded. She wasn't able to, get the kind of scientific support that she needed to get. And it was only when we were in a pandemic itself that her method was actually taken a look at. And all of a sudden it had, some kind of meritocracy that it did not have in all the years before when she was pushing it and unable to get her research funded. So I just point out that that's kind of a real live example of when our systems have bias, then that does not reward merit and instead maybe rewards, I don't know, incumbency or rewards other kind of biases that maybe we don't stop and think about enough. Literally, that is a life and death situation for many people in the US. And it was certainly had, big economic consequences that we did not have that type of vaccine and that the technology underlying that new type of vaccine available. I think I see some people asking about in a chat. NPR did a great interview with her. I'm guessing about 18 months ago. But it's a really interesting story if you ever kind of, have a little time and want to do a little bit of digging. Jessica, do you mind, can we move on to the next slide? Thanks. In the rest of her, kind of workplace focus, Caroline goes on to talk about the bias beginning early. It certainly begins in the way that, children, male and female, begin to think about, what is smart, what is leadership. And it begins very young, which, to me means that it's probably really baked into the culture around us. I remember as a young parent with two daughters, reading kind of Disney stories to them and, fairy tale stories. And I have to admit that on a few of those stories before the children could read and I was reading to them, I rewrote the end of some of those stories because I didn't want the end for, like she gets happy because she goes and gets married. I think I, changed them into like, and she goes and she becomes a CEO and, she was really happy. And so yes, I've lied to my children as a parenting strategy, but I would say, I have to say it didn't, all these kind of instances of bias didn't fully, I don't think I really saw many of them until I began to think about what the world meant to my daughters. And then I think I began to look a little bit more closely. And Susan, I know you have daughters as well. And I think I began to look a little bit more closely at what they were being told and what they were being taught, not just directly by me and, by my husband, but, by the culture around us and kind of the images that we show them and what they have to deal with every day. Caroline talks about the Henry Higgins effect in this chapter, which I think is a pretty brilliant way of describing the kind of the bias going on here. I think I think everybody's probably seen movies all based on Pygmalion, including the one from the 1960s with Audrey Hepburn, where the character Henry Higgins sings a song, "Why Can't a Woman Be More Like a Man?" And he's, very frustrated about, why women are as they are and why they ask for things and why they speak up. And I think that, when I first saw the movie, first of all, I think it's a terrific movie and I delight in Audrey Hepburn. And I think it's a, great entertainment. But, and I kind of laughed at the idea of why can't a woman be more like a man? But then when I read the chapter of that Caroline wrote about kind of, when we really look at our world around us, we see so much default male thinking, default male design, default male the default human is a male, I think, as Caroline says. And I was talking recently about this with Caroline, with an industrial designer who was a senior executive. And actually, I think I saw her on the chat. Karen, are you on here?
I am. Here I am.
Yeah. So
Hello.
another terrific woman to introduce you all to. This is Caroline Criado Perez. She has this terrific and to me fascinating experience working as an industrial designer. And we were talking, and I was just trying to understand. I was like, Karen, why, are so many things designed for kind of the default male? Like, don't they notice that women have more of the buying power? Doesn't our money at least matter if morally we don't? Like, what's going on? And Karen, did you want to talk about your response to what I said? Because I thought it was very interesting.
Sure. Well, thank you. I go back to there's just too few of us at the table to start with. So even though we're graduating from university with equal degrees in industrial design or architecture, and I really have spent, the decades of my career in the built world designing products. I spent the last 25 years in sports footwear and apparel, many of those at Nike. There are just too few women at the design table. And it doesn't mean that men cannot design for women, just like those of us who have been in the athletic field, we have designed for men. It's just that, to your point, when you are the only, or when you are the first, it's very hard to have your voice heard. And so it starts at the point of briefing a product, that if you don't have women at the table, you will forget, they will forget that women exist. And it's not with intent, it's just by default. So, my answer to everything, as you know, is we need to get more women at the table. We need to have more women in our design studios. We need to have women, looking at the briefs that are being created to create the product. So that is sort of my short answer, Catherine. You know that I could go on and on about this. I posted a video called Redraw the Balance. And I think what happens is we do have archetypes for creative genius, right? For those of us who are designing products or spaces or places, and that oftentimes is male. And so unless we make a really concerted effort to say who is not at the table, who are we missing in the design, I like to say that we can go from insulting to deadly, so shrink it and pink it, insulting, right? Take a shoe, shrink it down, color it pink, insulting. What the work that Verity Now is doing around crash test dummies is deadly. And along the way, there's expensive and dangerous. So that's just the short answer, but thank you. And thanks for all the work you're always doing.
Oh, thank you. I mean, you've been such a terrific, resource and sounding board, and you're doing such terrific work encouraging women to be in the field. And actually that kind of brings up another thing that Caroline talks about in section 2 in the workplace, where she talks about what's called the leaky pipeline, where, there's a pipeline of women, but then, they tend to fall out because of, for instance, the Henry Higgins effect, chapter 5 talks about, there are no parking spaces, for women at, the big tech company Google until Sheryl Sandberg became pregnant. And, just before then, they just didn't think about the trek that, a pregnant woman had to take from the far parking lot. And I've been there, it's a big parking lot, into the building. And kind of, what a physical burden that is. And it's just like you said, Karen, it's not necessarily that somebody wakes up in the morning and thinks, oh, I'm going to go oppress all the women today. It's more like, it's just an absence of thought about something that is not commonly thought of because the default is a male.
I just want to add to Catherine that I'm learning about this most recently from a group of students at Harvard who are doing some research, that it's not only during childbearing that we take a step back, but it's also during menopause that we take a step back as well. And that's been a really interesting phenomenon. So I always thought there was only one moment in time where I might lose ground, but it actually is proving out to be two moments. And, you know, those moments when you're at that age are probably when you've reached your stride. So more on that.
That's fascinating. Karen, I think we're going to be talking more. Thank you very much, Karen. I really appreciate it. Yeah, and I think somebody in the chat just mentioned taking a step back for caregiving for a parent as well. I think you'll see a lot of head nodding. I'm sure with many other people, are part of a sandwich generation where you're taking care of children, you're taking care of parents at some point. And in my opinion, caregiving in general is unseen, whether it's for, a child or a parent or someone else, and just not accounted for in compensation, not accounted for in retirement plans, not accounted for in taxes. And yeah, we could, again, there's a lot to talk about. I noticed that we only have about 19 minutes left, so I want to move it along and kind of to the next slide, if that's okay, Jessica. Yeah. So here it is. I think we've actually already segued into this very nicely with Karen. Thank you very much. It's about design. Susan and I see this, over and over again from the discussion around female crash test dummies. There seems to be, to me, the world seems to be divided into two groups. Number one is the people who just get it immediately. And that all tends to be, women and kind of allies who are sensitized to the idea that, yes, every time I get into a car, I know I'm going to be adjusting my seatbelt. I know I'm going to be adjusting it on the road. I know I'm going to be adjusting it like every few minutes. And if I happen to get into a crash, I don't know if, it's going to hit me during one of those times when I'm adjusting or I'm, in place, or I'm a technically out of place driver. I think, people in this first category, they know that they are out of place drivers in a cockpit, either because they're female or because they're tall or because they're pregnant or because, of some other reason. And I think that they, really get what we're talking about. A smaller group, and unfortunately sometimes a group that have a lot to say about how vehicles get designed, kind of fall into the other category, which is to say, why should we design for women? And Susan and I think have been in the position to say, well, why shouldn't you design for everyone? Because women are buying the vehicle. Why? Yep, there you go. Karen just wrote, women are not smaller men. Absolutely. That's it. We are not a shrunken version of males. We are a different person biofidelically. We have hips.
If I can just interrupt, because when we talk about women being smaller men, and Catherine, please correct me, when this all started in 1970, right, they used a male crash test dummy behind a wheel. It took them 20 years to even acknowledge that they might have to take women into account. And that's when they shrunk the male crash test dummy and put it in the passenger seat. Exactly. So there wasn't even an initial acknowledgement in the 1990s that women would be behind the wheel of a car. And we've made so little progress, even though we are the ones overwhelmingly who buy the cars and now who drive the cars. And again, I don't know where we are in this, Catherine, but I know in the beginning when they actually started to take these shrunk down, smaller men, calling them women, and put them behind the driver's seat, they tested them in neighborhoods, not on highways, because there still was that reticence to accept that women would be on a highway driving. So, there's this still in our government today, this Mayberry attitude of how women should be taken care of and thought of behind a wheel, which is so infuriating when you think that we're taxpayers too. And, you know, we're 52% of the population now, 52% of the voters. And I don't know what it is in terms of tax paying, but I'm sure if it's 50-50, it's more than that. And so it's just kind of infuriating that our tax dollars go into, you know, a circle that refuses to open up in order to take into account female safety. And then I'll stop. When Catherine opened up and we said that there were 61 current members of Congress from the last Congress who wrote to DOT, they were all Democrats because we thought that was important that they hear. And to those of you who have been in Washington, D.C., it's very rare to get someone of the same political party to question somebody in the administration. And they did, and still have not gotten a response. So we're not only invisible, they can't hear us either.
Well, and I think to me, part of what's frustrating is that the test itself, the 5-star safety rating test from the government, the new test just came out actually about a week ago. And still in that NHTSA 5-star safety rating test, women are still not tested behind the driver's wheel. They're not tested in the driver's seat. How is that even possible? So it's kind of twofold. Number one, there's no test for women in the driver's seat. Number two, even in other testing positions where they use women, they're actually using a shrink it and pink it version of the male dummy. So they're still not really testing for women because there's no, you know, allowance for an abdomen or for breasts or for hips. And, you know, that affects your position in a cockpit and the impact of that second collision when a crash happens, the internal collision when the body is whipped around inside a cockpit.
Well,
so,
and the overwhelming numbers of women who suffer from whiplash.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's crazy.
A muscular difference between our necks.
Yeah, it's frustrating, and I'm going to keep on going here because I know that we have, you know, a lot to kind of to discuss. But yeah, I would say that it's really shocking to me. First of all, that the problem still exists. Secondly, that you still get resistance about it. You know, we were in a meeting with a government official, I won't say who, and the government official was explaining that they were delaying working on, or they had some kind of conflict working on female crash test dummies because we still hadn't solved the issue of male man spreading in a passenger seat. In other words, like, we still don't know what the effect is when, you know, males are in a passenger seat and they, you know, spread their knees and how that affects a crash. And, you know, and I was just thinking, what? Did you just tell me that, like, we cannot possibly make women safer in a cockpit until we solve the towering male, you know, man spreading issue? You know, like, it was pretty jaw dropping, honestly. And I find that kind of persistent resistance just baffling. But I mean, I suppose we just need to kind of continue to push forward, and you know, demonstrate the evidence and demonstrate what's possible until the right thing happens. I noticed that we're kind of running out of time. Jessica, I think it might be a good idea to kind of take off the recording and let some other folks, join. Does that sound good?
Sure, Catherine, that sounds great. I am stopping the recording now, everyone.